Willow Creek's Last Stand, the shocking truth behind the quarantine outbreak. Chapter 1, The Outbreak. Nestled deep within a lush valley, the town of Willow Creek seemed like something out of a postcard. Cobblestone streets wound through rows of charming cottages, their flower-filled window boxes adding bursts of color against the rustic wood and stone facades. The town's history was rich, its traditions cherished by every resident. The annual Harvest Festival was the highlight of the year, where the entire community gathered to celebrate the fruits of their labor, sharing laughter, stories, and homemade cider under the golden hues of autumn. Life in Willow Creek was simple yet fulfilling. Neighbors knew one another by name, and doors were rarely locked. It was a place where time moved a little slower, and people cherished the small moments, like the warmth of a summer evening or the first snowflake of winter. But beneath this peaceful surface, there were secrets, and as the world beyond the valley faced new challenges, so too would this idyllic town. Dr. Emily Harper was Willow Creek's only physician, a role she had inherited from her father, who had served the town faithfully for over 3 decades. Emily was dedicated, compassionate, and respected by all who knew her. She had a calm demeanor that reassured even the most anxious patients, and her presence was a comfort to many. Yet, behind her kind eyes, Emily harbored a secret that weighed heavily on her heart, a mistake from her past that she feared would one day come to light. Mayor John Collins was the town's guiding hand, a figure of authority who had led Willow Creek through good times and bad. He was a man of charisma and poise, always knowing the right words to say to keep the peace. But John was not as transparent as he appeared. Beneath his well-polished exterior, he concealed a hidden agenda that could unravel the very fabric of the community he claimed to protect. Lena Mitchell, a journalist who had once dreamed of big city success, had recently returned to Willow Creek after her career had hit a dead end. The small-town life had once felt stifling, but now it offered her a second chance to prove herself. Lena was determined to uncover a story that would reignite her career, and she had a gut feeling that Willow Creek held more than just picturesque views and friendly faces. Tom and Sarah Roberts were the epitome of young love. Married just 2 years, they were now expecting their first child, a baby they had already named Lily. Their excitement was palpable, but so was their anxiety. The world outside their small town seemed increasingly uncertain, and they worried about what kind of future their daughter would inherit. As the leaves began to turn, painting the town in shades of red and gold, a shadow fell over Willow Creek. It started with a single case of what appeared to be a severe rash. Dr. Harper treated the patient, a middle-aged man who worked at the local hardware store, with the usual remedies, but the rash only worsened. Soon, similar cases began to surface. First a child, then a teacher, then an elderly woman who lived alone on the edge of town. Emily's concern grew as she realized that these were not isolated incidents. The symptoms were consistent with monkeypox, a virus she had only read about in medical journals. It was rare, and its presence in a remote town like Willow Creek was alarming. She sent samples to the state lab for confirmation, her heart heavy with dread. Within days, the results came back positive: monkeypox. The town was now at the epicenter of a potential outbreak. Emily immediately informed Mayor Collins, who, despite his calm exterior, understood the gravity of the situation. He knew that a quarantine was inevitable, and the news would send the town into a panic. The government acted swiftly, declaring a strict quarantine to prevent the virus from spreading beyond the valley. Willow Creek was cut off from the outside world, with roadblocks set up at every entry point, and the residents were ordered to stay indoors. The once bustling town square fell silent, the joy of the upcoming Harvest Festival replaced by fear and uncertainty. Tension gripped the town like a vice. People, who once exchanged pleasantries over white picket fences, now eyed each other with suspicion. Supermarkets were raided and shelves emptied as residents hoarded essentials. Rumors began to swirl. Some whispered that the virus had been brought in by an outsider. Others claimed it was a government experiment gone wrong. The strain of isolation and the fear of the unknown began to erode the close-knit bonds that had defined Willow Creek for generations. As the days stretched into weeks, relationships began to fray. Tom and Sarah found themselves arguing over the smallest things, their shared anxiety about the future magnified by the stress of quarantine. Lena, ever the journalist, sensed that there was more to the story than what was being told. She noticed inconsistencies in the official reports and began to dig deeper, her instincts driving her to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. Dr. Harper worked tirelessly, her days consumed by the growing number of cases. But the pressure weighed on her, the fear that her past mistake would somehow resurface, gnawing at her resolve. Mayor Collins, too, felt the strain. He was the face of calm leadership, but every decision he made was a calculated move to protect his own interests, even as the town's situation grew more desperate. Willow Creek, once a haven of peace, was now a powder keg, ready to explode. And as the virus continued its relentless march, it became clear that the outbreak was only the beginning of their ordeal. The true test of the town's strength would come not from the disease itself, but from the secrets it began to unearth. Chapter 2: Secrets Unveiled. The once quiet town of Willow Creek had turned into a place of whispers and hushed conversations. The quarantine had not only isolated the residents from the outside world, but also from one another. Fear hung heavy in the air, and with it came the unearthing of secrets long buried beneath the town's picturesque surface. Dr. Emily Harper was in over her head. The number of patients pouring into her small clinic had surged far beyond what she could manage alone. The symptoms were worsening, rashes had turned to blisters, and fevers had spiked to dangerous levels. Emily moved from one patient to the next, her face etched with worry as she administered treatments that seemed increasingly futile. The town's only doctor, she felt the weight of every life on her shoulders, and the pressure was slowly eroding her resolve. It was during one of these exhausting days that Emily stumbled upon a detail that made her blood run cold. She had been reviewing the medical histories of her earliest patients, trying to find a pattern, something that could explain the outbreak. In doing so, she discovered that one of the first infected individuals, Mr. Thompson, had recently been in contact with someone from a nearby city. The visit had occurred just days before the quarantine was imposed. This revelation sent a shiver down Emily's spine. If the virus had originated from outside Willow Creek, the implications were devastating. It meant that the quarantine might have come too late and that the town's isolation was based on a lie, or worse, a cover-up. Emily's mind raced as she contemplated what to do with this information. The truth could cause panic, but keeping it hidden felt like a betrayal of the oath she had sworn as a doctor. The conflict gnawed at her, adding to the growing pit of guilt and anxiety in her chest. Meanwhile, Mayor John Collins had become a figure of increasing suspicion. His usual confident demeanor had given way to a strange unease, noticed by those who interacted with him. He spent more time locked away in his office, emerging only for brief, carefully orchestrated public appearances where he assured the townspeople that everything was under control. But behind closed doors, John's calm exterior crumbled. Late one night, as the town slept uneasily, John received a message, another in a series of cryptic communications that had been arriving regularly since the outbreak began. The messages were short and to the point, written in a cold, emotionless tone. This one read, "Proceed as planned. Distractions are working. Ensure no loose ends." John's hand trembled as he read the words. He knew exactly who the sender was and what they wanted. The outbreak had provided him with a convenient smokescreen, an opportunity to bury a scandal that, if exposed, would destroy him. For months, he had been siphoning funds from the town's budget, funneling the money into a failed business venture that was now on the verge of collapse. The quarantine and the ensuing chaos had allowed him to shift the focus away from his misdeeds, but the cost was high, too high. Lena Mitchell had always been tenacious, a trait that had served her well in her career as a journalist. Since returning to Willow Creek, she had sensed that something was off. The town's official statements were too polished, too controlled. There were gaps in the information being provided, and the mayor's behavior was increasingly erratic. Lena's instincts told her that there was more to the story than what was being shared. Determined to uncover the truth, Lena began digging deeper. She pored over old town records, reviewed public statements, and discreetly interviewed residents. The more she uncovered, the more convinced she became that the outbreak was not a random occurrence. The pieces of the puzzle slowly started to come together. Financial records that didn't add up, strange disappearances of key documents, and whispered conversations about the mayor's involvement in something sinister. It was during one of her late-night research sessions that Lena stumbled upon a crucial clue. Buried in an obscure financial report was a transaction that caught her eye. A significant withdrawal from the town's emergency fund just days before the first case of monkeypox was reported. The money had been transferred to an account in a city known for its ties to a private research lab. Lena's pulse quickened as she connected the dots. Could it be that the outbreak had been orchestrated, a deliberate act to divert attention from something even darker? As Lena delved further, she knew she was onto something big. But with the town under quarantine and the mayor pulling the strings, getting the truth out would be no small feat. The risk was high, but Lena's resolve was stronger. She was determined to expose the truth, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, the quarantine was taking its toll on Tom and Sarah Roberts. Sarah's pregnancy, which had once been a source of joy, now brought nothing but fear. The town's limited medical supplies were dwindling, and the fear of infection loomed large over them. Tom did his best to reassure Sarah, but the strain was evident in his eyes. They argued more frequently now, over things that once seemed trivial, but now felt like the end of the world. Sarah's worries about bringing a child into a world gripped by disease and uncertainty were compounded by the fact that she couldn't even be sure if she would have the medical support she needed when the time came. The couple's once happy home was now filled with tension, their hopes for the future overshadowed by the ever-present threat of the virus. The weight of the quarantine, the fear of the unknown, and the secrets simmering beneath the surface of their lives were pushing them to the brink. As Willow Creek stood on the edge of unraveling, the town's secrets began to creep into the light. Dr. Harper's guilt, Mayor Collins' deceit, Lena's investigation, and Tom and Sarah's struggle all converged in a town that was rapidly losing its innocence. The outbreak was more than just a disease. It was a catalyst, forcing every resident to confront the truth, both about themselves and the place they called home. And as these truths began to emerge, it became clear that the real danger was not just the virus that threatened their lives, but the lies that threatened to tear them apart. Chapter 3: The Unraveling. Willow Creek, once a harmonious community, now simmered with tension that threatened to boil over. The quarantine had turned neighbors against each other, with the town's unity fraying at the edges. Fear had taken root, and from that fear, division sprouted. Some residents, desperate for answers, demanded transparency from their leaders, while others clung to the mayor's reassurances, unwilling to believe that their trusted leader might be hiding something sinister. As the quarantine stretched on, the atmosphere grew more volatile. Meetings that once served as a means to calm the populace now turned into shouting matches. Residents, once friendly, began to view each other with suspicion. Accusations flew. Those demanding the truth were branded as troublemakers, while those supporting the mayor were seen as blind followers. The town that had once been so close-knit was tearing itself apart. Amidst this chaos, Dr. Emily Harper struggled under the weight of her secret. Each day, the burden grew heavier, pressing down on her chest, suffocating her with guilt. The knowledge that she had kept silent gnawed at her, eating away at her resolve. Every time she looked into the eyes of her patients, she saw the trust they placed in her, trust she felt she no longer deserved. It was late one night, after yet another grueling day at the clinic, that Emily found herself standing outside Lena Mitchell's door. The town's journalist had become a thorn in the mayor's side, relentlessly pursuing the truth, and Emily knew that if anyone could help her, it was Lena. She hesitated for a moment, her hand poised to knock, before finally summoning the courage to tap lightly on the door. Lena answered, surprised to see the doctor at such a late hour. Her eyes, sharp and inquisitive, softened as she saw the strain etched on Emily's face. Without a word, Lena stepped aside, allowing Emily to enter. The small living room was cluttered with papers and files, evidence of Lena's ongoing investigation into the town's unraveling. Emily took a seat, her hands trembling as she struggled to find the words to begin. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, Emily confessed. She told Lena about the visit she had received weeks before the outbreak, an unannounced meeting with Mayor Collins. He had warned her of a potential health crisis, urging her to keep quiet until more information was available. He had painted it as a precaution, something that might not even come to pass. But as the cases began to appear, Emily realized the full extent of what she had agreed to. The mayor had not just known about the outbreak, he had anticipated it, and his instructions had been clear: keep it quiet to prevent panic. Emily, overwhelmed and isolated, had complied, trusting in the mayor's judgment. Now she saw her silence for what it was: a betrayal of the very people she had sworn to protect. Lena listened intently, her mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. The inconsistencies she had uncovered, the strange financial transactions, the mayor's secretive behavior, it all pointed to something far more sinister than a mere outbreak. With Emily's confession, Lena realized she was closer to the truth than ever before. Determined to follow the trail, Lena worked late into the night, combing through the files she had amassed. What she found was more shocking than she could have imagined. The outbreak wasn't natural, it was engineered. Lena discovered evidence linking the outbreak to a covert experiment funded by a major pharmaceutical company. The company had been conducting illegal trials in remote locations, testing new treatments without proper oversight. Willow Creek had been chosen as one of those locations, its isolation making it the perfect test site. The mayor, desperate to cover his financial misdeeds, had struck a deal with the company. In exchange for allowing the experiment to proceed, he would receive a substantial payout, enough to cover the missing funds and secure his future. But the experiment had gone horribly wrong, and now the town was paying the price. Lena's discovery left her shaken, but she knew she had to act quickly. The town was on the brink, and if the truth didn't come out soon, it might never see the light of day. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed allies. Meanwhile, across town, Tom Roberts was grappling with his own fears. Sarah's pregnancy was progressing, and the constant stress of the quarantine was taking its toll on both of them. He had heard the whispers, the rumors that the mayor was involved in something far more nefarious than he let on. Tom had always been a man of action, and the thought of sitting idly by while his family's future was at risk was unbearable. One evening, after yet another argument with Sarah about their dwindling supplies, Tom made a decision. He could no longer stand by and do nothing. The mayor had to be confronted, and the truth had to be exposed, no matter the cost. He knew it was dangerous, but Tom was willing to risk everything to protect his wife and their unborn child. With resolve hardening in his chest, Tom left his home and made his way to the mayor's office. He had no plan, no strategy, just the burning need to get answers. As he walked through the eerily silent streets of Willow Creek, he steeled himself for the confrontation that awaited him. The town was unraveling, and with it, the lives of everyone who called it home. The secrets that had been hidden for so long were coming to the surface, and as they did, they threatened to destroy everything in their path. The time for truth had come, but with it would come consequences that no one in Willow Creek was prepared for. Chapter 4: The Confrontation. The air in Willow Creek was thick with a sense of impending reckoning. The town's unraveling had reached a critical juncture, and the few who knew the truth were determined to confront the man responsible. Tom Roberts, Lena Mitchell, and Dr. Emily Harper had spent sleepless nights piecing together the fragments of the mayor's deceit. Now, they stood united, ready to face Mayor John Collins and demand the answers the town so desperately needed. The trio arrived at the town hall under the cover of dusk, the usually vibrant building now a looming shadow against the fading light. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Collins, already aware that his secret was crumbling, sat behind his desk, his fingers tapping nervously on the wooden surface. The confident leader Willow Creek once admired was now a man on the edge of desperation. Tom was the first to speak, his voice laced with controlled anger. "You've got a lot to answer for, Mayor. This town is falling apart, and it's your doing." Collins tried to maintain his composure, his gaze shifting between the three of them. "Tom, I understand you're upset, But this is a misunderstanding. I've done everything in my power to protect this town." "Protect?" Lena interjected, her eyes blazing with determination. "You call this protection? You knew about the outbreak before it happened. You knew this quarantine was never about our safety. It was about covering up your involvement in a dangerous experiment." The mayor's face paled, but he attempted to brush off her accusations. "Lena, you've always been one for conspiracy theories. You're letting your imagination run wild." But Lena was prepared. With a steady hand, she placed a thick file on the desk, filled with documents, financial records, and communication logs. "This isn't imagination, Mayor. This is evidence. Evidence that you colluded with a pharmaceutical company to turn this town into a testing ground. You gambled with our lives to save your own skin." Collins stared at the file, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. The room fell silent, the gravity of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Dr. Harper, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "I trusted you, John. I trusted you when you told me to stay quiet, that it was for the greater good. But you lied. You lied to all of us." The mayor, cornered and unable to deflect any longer, slumped in his chair, the fight drained from his eyes. "You're right," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I did know. I was approached by representatives from the pharmaceutical company months ago. They offered me a deal, money, resources, everything I needed to cover up the misappropriated funds. In return, they asked me to allow them to conduct a controlled experiment. They assured me it was safe, that the virus would be contained quickly." He paused, his hands trembling as he continued. "I thought I could control it. I thought I could protect the town and fix my mistakes. But I was wrong. I never imagined it would get this far." The room fell into a tense silence as Collins' confession settled over them like a dark cloud. The anger in Tom's eyes burned even brighter, but before he could respond, Lena's phone buzzed urgently. She glanced at the screen, her heart dropping as she read the message. "We've got a bigger problem," she said, her voice laced with dread. Tom and Dr. Harper turned to her, confusion etched on their faces. "What now?" Tom asked, his frustration palpable. Lena looked up, her expression grim. "There's been a new wave of infections, worse than before. The virus, it's mutated." Dr. Harper's heart sank. "Mutated? How? We've been in quarantine. There shouldn't have been any outside exposure." "That's the thing," Lena replied, her voice shaking. "The quarantine wasn't just about keeping the virus contained. It was about preventing the mutation from escaping. We were never meant to survive this. We were part of their experiment all along, and now that the virus has mutated, we're even more dangerous to the outside world." A cold realization settled over them. The town had never stood a chance. The quarantine was not a safeguard, it was a containment. The pharmaceutical company, in their ruthless pursuit of scientific advancement, had played with lives, and the town of Willow Creek was their sacrificial lamb. Mayor Collins buried his face in his hands, the full weight of his betrayal crushing him. "I didn't know," he muttered, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't know it would come to this." Tom's hands clenched into fists, the fury inside him threatening to explode. "You doomed us all," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "For what? Money? Power? You've destroyed this town, and for what?" Before anyone could respond, the room was filled with the sound of distant sirens. Emergency vehicles began to converge on the town hall, their lights flashing through the windows. The outside world had finally caught wind of the disaster that was unfolding in Willow Creek. Lena, Tom, and Dr. Harper exchanged a look, their shared realization settling in. The truth was out, but at a cost far greater than they could have imagined. The town was not just facing a deadly virus, they were on the brink of total annihilation. As the sirens grew louder, a single, chilling thought echoed in their minds. The experiment wasn't over, and the real threat was only just beginning. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. The once peaceful town of Willow Creek was now a battleground against an invisible enemy. The mutated virus had spread with terrifying speed, turning neighbors into potential threats. The air was thick with fear, the streets eerily silent, save for the distant wails of those succumbing to the infection. The town was teetering on the brink of collapse, and the few who remained uninfected knew they were running out of time. Emily Harper and Lena Mitchell moved quickly through the makeshift medical center, that had been set up in the town hall. The normally bustling hub of civic activity was now filled with the sick and dying, the air heavy with the stench of antiseptic and despair. They had little to work with, supplies were dwindling, and the knowledge they had was barely enough to keep them afloat. But they had one thing left: determination. "We need to isolate the mutated strain," Dr. Harper said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "If we can find a way to slow it down, maybe we can contain it long enough for outside help to arrive." Lena nodded, her mind racing as she sorted through the chaotic information she'd gathered. "There has to be something in the pharmaceutical company's research," she replied, scanning through the documents she'd collected. "They must have anticipated a mutation. There has to be a way to stop it." As they worked, the tension in the room was palpable. Time was slipping away, and the virus was relentless. In the corner, Mayor John Collins stood, his face a mask of guilt and regret. The weight of his actions had finally caught up with him, and he knew there was no escaping the consequences. "I need to speak with you both," Collins said quietly, approaching the two women. They looked up, surprised by the gravity in his tone. I know I've made unforgivable mistakes," he began, his voice trembling, "but I think I can help. The pharmaceutical company provided me with a fail-safe, a way to contain the virus if things went wrong. I was too blinded by my own self-preservation to see the danger." Dr. Harper and Lena exchanged a wary glance. "What are you saying?" Dr. Harper asked cautiously. Collins took a deep breath. "There's a facility on the outskirts of town, hidden in the woods. It's where they conducted some of the initial experiments. Inside, there's a containment chamber, a last resort. If we can lure the infected there and activate it, we might be able to stop the spread." Lena's eyes narrowed. "And why should we trust you now? How do we know this isn't another one of your schemes?" The mayor's eyes filled with tears. "Because I've lost everything already," he whispered. "My family, my dignity. I've destroyed this town. But maybe, just maybe, I can do one good thing before it's too late." Dr. Harper saw the sincerity in his eyes. She nodded slowly. "We don't have any other options," she said, turning to Lena. "We have to try." The decision was made. With grim resolve, the trio prepared for what would be the final stand. They gathered what few resources they had and set out for the facility, the weight of their mission heavy on their shoulders. The town, now nearly consumed by the virus, was a ghostly backdrop as they made their way through the darkened streets. As they approached the facility, it became clear just how dire their situation was. The building was in disrepair, vines creeping up its sides, windows shattered. Inside, the air was stale, the remnants of past experiments still littering the halls. It was a place that reeked of forgotten sins, a monument to human folly. The containment chamber was buried deep within the facility, a massive steel door marking its entrance. "This is it," Collins said, his voice barely audible. "Once we're inside, there's no turning back." They worked quickly, setting up the chamber and preparing to activate the failsafe. The infected were drawing closer, their moans echoing through the halls. Dr. Harper's hands shook as she made the final adjustments. "We're almost out of time," she said, glancing at Collins. The mayor's face was set in a determined grimace. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "I'll draw them in." Lena and Dr. Harper stared at him in shock. "John, no," Dr. Harper protested. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted, his eyes filled with a steely resolve. "This is my mess, my responsibility. If this is how I can make things right, then so be it." Before they could argue further, Collins grabbed the door handle and swung it open. The infected, sensing fresh prey, began to surge toward him. He turned to look at them one last time. "Get out of here," he ordered. "Seal the chamber once they're inside." With that, he stepped into the darkness, the infected swarming around him. Lena and Dr. Harper watched in horror as he disappeared from view, the screams of the infected mingling with his own as the chamber filled. The door closed with a deafening clang, sealing the fate of those inside. The containment chamber's failsafe activated, a series of automated systems whirring to life. There was a brief moment of silence, followed by a low hum as the chamber's interior was flooded with an intense burst of ultraviolet light. The screams were cut short, replaced by an eerie stillness. Outside the facility, Lena and Dr. Harper waited, their hearts pounding in their chests. When the hum finally ceased, they knew it was over. The virus, at least within the chamber, had been neutralized, but the cost had been high. Days passed, and slowly, life began to return to Willow Creek. The quarantine was eventually lifted, though the scars it left would remain forever. The town had been irrevocably changed, its population reduced, its innocence lost. But from the ashes of their ordeal, something new began to take root. The residents, once divided by fear and distrust, found strength in their shared suffering. They rebuilt their homes, their lives, and their community, now united by the hardships they had faced together. They knew the darkness that had lurked in their midst, and in acknowledging it, they had found the light of resilience. Lena, true to her word, published her findings. Her story made headlines, exposing the truth behind the outbreak and the pharmaceutical company's role in it. The world watched as the town of Willow Creek became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked greed and the importance of transparency in leadership. Dr. Harper, too, found solace in the aftermath. She had made peace with her own guilt, knowing that she had done everything in her power to save the town. She remained in Willow Creek, continuing to serve the community she had always loved, her dedication to the town now stronger than ever. As the town gathered for the first harvest festival since the quarantine, the mood was bittersweet. The shadows of the past lingered, but there was also a sense of hope, a belief that they could face whatever came next, as long as they faced it together. In the end, the lesson was clear. The truth, no matter how painful, must be faced. It was only through confronting their darkest fears that the residents of Willow Creek had found the strength to rebuild. They had learned, in the harshest way possible, that transparency and trust were the pillars of any community. And though the scars would never fully heal, they were a reminder of what had been lost and what had been saved. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing short story. See you in the next one.